So my name is Ash. I'm just a local hobbyist, just like you guys as well. I've been in the my reefing age, as I say, is 6 years. So I'm fairly still a kid in this hobby. But over the past 6 years, sorry, I've learned quite a lot in terms of lots of DIYs, lots of trial and errors. I have a small YouTube channel where I do my small little trial and errors, and what has worked for me and what is where I have failed, so that fellow hobbyists can try and learn from my mistakes, so they can avoid those mistakes. In the audience, I see a couple of more my YouTube friends as well, Devin and Avro, and their knowledge in terms of this hobby is also far more than where I stand at the moment. But nonetheless, Brian Wog approached me this December, asking me to give a small talk on SPS and how to sustain and grow SPS. A lot of time the new hobbyists who enter this hobby, they see nice, beautiful SPS aquariums full of colors, and they want that kind of tank. That's how I ended up entering the hobby. And we just want that kind of a beautiful, thriving SPS reef in our house. When you come home, you see those beautiful colors. But there's a lot that goes in, to get to that point. There's a lot that goes in there. And my whole purpose of today's presentation is to try and encourage those new hobbyists and make them feel more comfortable that yes, you guys can grow SPS as well. Don't be, don't panic that you are new in the hobby and SPS is the next thing in advanced stage. No. You can grow SPS and it's not that hard. So that's going to be my topic today, and I hope I'm able to deliver. And but before I delve into the topic, I would like to first thank Brian and his team of volunteers for being able to bring this show to its successful second year. I mean, down south the border, there are lots of shows, Macna, Reefapalooza, Reef Stock, and so on and so forth. But down here for us Canadians, there are barely any shows. And that's how I ended up going on YouTube, because there were barely any social networking available for us Canadians. So I really want to thank Brian from the bottom of the heart. And that was the whole reason why I said yes to him, is because I want to support the cause. I want to support that he's trying to bring this hobby into its fruitful, and he's trying to grow this tree. It's a small frag, as we say, which he's trying to grow into a colony. So definitely that's, if I can play a part in contributing to raise that frag into a colony, I definitely will take that path. Whether I'm prepared or not, I don't know, but you always need to give that effort, right? So that's going to be my talk on today. Here is my small little Reefer 450. It was just set up September 21st, 2018. But before this tank, I used to have a 150-gallon dual overflow Marineland tank with a basement sump, and I've done everything, all my trial and error in that tank. That's where I learned the hobby. That's where I met so many YouTubers, and we shared great experiences with each others. And so that used to be my learning curve. And I started that tank up in fall 2012. But believe it or not, I was not able to keep SPS for the 4.5 years that I had that tank. Only at the end of that curve, I was able to figure out, the breakthrough or the point where I was able to narrow down why I was not able to keep SPS, and I would explain to you, in my next slide. So this is the slide that I'm going to concentrate on my today's topic. These are 8 core components, and this slide is derived from Bulk Reef Supplies presentation. And of course, with due permission from Ryan, I was able to incorporate this into today's presentation. And if you can notice, this component not only is good enough for your SPS, but it will be very helpful overall in your whole reefing journey. It talks about right from the beginning stage where you're going to cycle your tank, then the filtration, lights, flow, chemistry, coral nutrition, husbandry, and maintenance. And I will walk you through how each of this stage are like building blocks for your reef, and if you kind of fall apart on one block, you will be able to have some difficulties, and it takes some kind of dedication to stay on top. Not a whole lot, so don't be overwhelmed, not a whole lot, but just to stay, and keep an eye on those small topics. So of course the first topic is going to be cycling your reef tank, and cycling is such a, I put that comment saying it's a stepping stone of your reef, because we all know when we start a tank, and a reef tank can be cycled in many different ways. You could add raw shrimp, you could add some flake foods, and you could also start with bottled bacteria nowadays to expedite that cycle. But one thing which is very important that happens during this phase is the nitrogen cycle. And that nitrogen cycle teaches you a lot. This is where you will gain, I would say, 90% of your knowledge, because that nitrogen cycle just does not happen when you're cycling your tank. It happens 24/7 for the rest of the life when you are going to have your tank. Every time you feed your corals or your fishes, that nitrogen cycle happens. Every time you add a new fish, that nitrogen cycle happens. Every time you do a water change, that nitrogen cycle happens. So every time you make any changes, this nitrogen cycle happens. And what is the nitrogen cycle? It's pretty simple. So as the picture explains, it's the fish waste. When you're cycling a tank, if there's no fish, you could just start feeding with some flake foods, or you could start feeding with some raw shrimp, and eventually that shrimp decays, or that food decays, and it becomes ammonia. That ammonia is then converted into nitrites with a certain kind of bacteria, right? And then that nitrite gets converted into nitrate, which eventually you are able to take it out by way of water changes, by way of dosing, carbon dosing, and so on and so forth, right? So this nitrogen cycle also will teach you your attitude towards your tank. We all know when we start the tank, how eager we are to add that first fish or to first coral. We want to just, as soon as you have the water in the tank, you want to go to Big L's, you want to go to any LFSs, and you want to go and just buy those coral and put it in there and say, I have a coral in my tank. But here is where your attitude is going to be tested. Here is where the first stage of your reefing journey teaches you what? You cannot add a coral unless the tank is cycled. That tank is telling you, I'm not ready. Don't put that coral in me yet. It will take time. That water will take time. And what happens here is, it's the bacteria. You need to let that bacteria develop. That bacteria, unless and until is not able to take care of the actual bio load, it won't support the growth and the sustainability of any coral. So that's where your patience is tested. And we all know nothing happens overnight in a reef tank. You need patience, patience, and patience. I really am going to emphasize this. I have gone through this. I put the coral in the first week of cycling my tank, and guess what? That coral was done in 2 weeks, and I ended up losing so much money. And I'm trying to pass on this information to you guys so you guys can avoid making those mistakes that I have avoided, and try and save you guys some money, because in the end it's the hard-earned money that you put into this tank. And I want you guys to be able to enjoy this hobby. Make sure it's enjoyable rather than stressful. Most of the times people enter this hobby and they get so much stress because they end up putting so much money in the tank. Forget the equipment part. I'm not even talking about the equipment part, right? And eventually the corals and the fishes starts dying, and one fine day they will say, you know what, this is not for me. I'm just going to put the towel on the tank, and that is it. They call it in. And I have been there. That's how I closed my 150 gallon. But in the end, it was always biting me. My wife was always telling me that, this is your hobby. You learned so much. Why? And then she supported. She's sitting right there. Oh, sorry about that. And so she actually encouraged me again to jump in. So up in 2018, right in January, February, is where I shut down my 150. And my fellow friends, I can see, Avro and Devin. No, this is not the end. You learned for the past 6 years. Now you have the knowledge, and now you want to quit the hobby. You can't do that, right? So of course, with her encouragement and my fellow reefers, I went back. I joined Reef Canada. and I found a good deal. I picked up a small nano. I ended up, and that's where I was able to figure out how to keep SPS. I don't want to give you that secret right now. I want you guys to hang around and kind of get the feel of this, and then eventually I will share that particular guru mantra, where we call in Hindi, that's something, that's a magical thing that you will, once you kind of nail that thing down, there is no stopping for you to grow any SPS in the world. So the next slide, as you can see, I call it as the support system. And SPS by nature needs, your tank by nature needs filtration, lights, and flow. When you talk about filtration, pristine water means healthier corals. And what does that mean is, pristine water means ultra clear water, but not ultra low with nutrients. Your corals need certain kind of nutrients. In the past, we used to think about, if you want to go SPS, zero nitrates, zero phosphates, so ultra low nutrients. That's not the case. Over the period of years, the hobbyists have done some research and some trial and error, and they're able to find out that no, in the ocean, how do they survive? Because they need some kind of nutrients to develop that skeleton, right? Without those nutrients, they won't survive. In the end, these are animals. These are not plants. They need food to survive. They need food to grow. So you definitely need nutrients. But the key is nutrient control. If you keep on feeding your tank non-stop, you will see algae growing all over the case. You don't want that to happen. So that's why the nutrient control, it should be in the balanced format. Your nitrates and your phosphates needs to be in the balanced format. Once you nail that balance down, if you do some research about Redfield ratio, where nitrates and phosphates needs to be in a certain ratio that interacts in the ocean, and they balances each other out. So if your phosphates are going high, your nitrates needs to be at certain level to bring those phosphates down, and vice versa, right? If you try to go really low on nutrients, you will end up having bryopsis, which is a dreaded algae that will eventually take your tank over. And that bryopsis has deterred so many reefers to quit the hobby. But before we go into those advanced stages, just control that. Just watch your tank. Just watch your tank, and if you are feeding a little bit of food, and if your corals are happy, you see a nice polyp extension, leave it at that. Don't try to walk away with that your intention that I want to feed more. I want to feed more, and that's where you ended up kind of messing up your tank, because once you start going into feed, well, that food is being consumed by your fish, and then eventually it's becoming a waste. And if you do not have a good, strong filtration, you will end up having those algae issues, and then your SPS will then eventually, there are stages how the SPS goes out of your tank. First, they will lose their color. They will start becoming brown. And after the brown stage, you will see white, stunting going on, which is slow tissue necrosis. So that's how the SPS starts dying, right? But you could avoid that. And in the end, as I said, it's what goes in has to come out. And that's the picture of my sump as it stands right now with the Reefer 450, where pretty simple stage. The water flows in, goes through the filter floss, and it has marine pure blocks, which actually controls the nitrates, and just a small skimmer, which is reef octopus, good enough to handle twice the load of my current tank. So that's one thing very important. You should have a good skimmer, not strong enough that it won't be able to skim anything because it's too strong, but should be double the size of your tank, which will help you take some nutrients and organic waste out. The refugium. Now let me tell you about the refugium. The refugium, for it to control your nutrients, it should be twice the size of your tank if you really are relying on refugium and these mangroves to remove those nutrients. They are just for the show, right? If you really want, up in the US, Julian Sprung, he has clearly mentioned that if you want your refugium to remove the nitrates and phosphates of your tank, then you gotta double the size of your display. And of course, nobody have that much of a room to put, if you have a 100-gallon tank, you are not going to put a 200-gallon refugium. If you have space and if you put it, you might not even need all these marine pure blocks and anything, because your refugium will be so strong to take care of and that's nature. That's how it happens in the ocean. But in our house aquaria, we don't have that much of a space. So The refugium, the reason I put is to let the pods, the copepods and all the other kind of pods multiply. It's like a refugium, so it's a refuge for them to multiply, right? And at the end of the day, then last chamber is the return chamber that pushes the water back up, right? Now I do not use a return pump to create flow in my tank. This is just to control the level of the flow into the sump and going up, because most of the time people try to use that as a means of flow. I think that's a bad idea, because that's an equipment. It's a return. It's supposed to just return the flow, the water back into your aquarium. Use the power heads, because those are the ones that can give you some strong flow. The lights, this is the basic number, the range 250 to 350 par. Par is the measure, the way how they measure the light. You could easily rent a par meter. You don't have to go and buy par meters. Just rent a par meter from your local LFS. If you're not sure, you can join the Facebook forums, Reef Canada, GTAR, ORK, so many forums that we have here for the support. And just place your comment up there, and somebody will be able to come forward and rent you a par meter, right? I know I rented from Niagara Corals up in Mississauga for $20 for a day, and I was able to note down all the pars. So that kind of gives you an idea at what level of your aquarium, top 6 inches, the bottoms, middle of your aquarium, and the sand bed, how much strong light is going on. Because it's always good to have that information when you're putting a new coral, knowing that SPS needs a minimum of 250 to 350 par. Because they grow in lagoon, right? They grow in shallow waters, right? So there is a ton of strong light that hits them. We need to try. We cannot resemble what happens in the ocean, but we can always try. The technology today has allowed us to try and go as close to as possible to what is given in the ocean. So you take advantage of that, right? And many times what happens is people try to go on, no offense to anybody, on a cheaper route. We try to buy some cheap lights from fellow reefers here and there. Try to avoid that. Believe me or not, I've been there, done that. It will eventually not work out, and you will end up saying, why is my SPS not coloring up, or what's wrong with me? And it will be just as simple problem as your lights. It may not be putting that strong par, right? So something to keep in mind, that have good equipments right from the beginning, so you don't have to worry about failures down the road. So make sure that your stepping stone is very strong. Once you have good equipment, you are kind of preparing your tank for success. And nowadays you have LEDs, T5, hybrids. In the past, people used to use metal halides. Some of them are still using metal halides, which are proven success to grow SPS, because they are very strong light. But why are most of the new reefers don't want to go into that? A, they are too strong on your electric bill, and B, they will give some serious heat around the room where you have those lights. So that's why. So people have come up with LEDs, T5 combo, hybrids, right? ReefDudes and ATI. That's what I run on my system. If you can see, I'm running a 6-bulb ATI and a single ReefDude from the front. And that's all the lights I'm using on my tank, and I'm able to keep all the SPS, no issues whatsoever, including the coloration, right? So keep that in mind. Acclimation is when you buy a coral from an LFS or a fellow reefer. Don't just go and put that coral straight onto that strong light section. Always acclimate them, right? Take your time. When you have your own baby growing in your family, you don't just go and feed him strong food right away, right? You give him with some kind of cereal, and slowly, gradually they start eating the chicken. Correct me if I'm wrong. Same thing with these animals. They are small. Don't go and put them straight up to that light. They will shock themselves, and eventually they will bleach, they will turn white, and they will die, right? So try and avoid that. Acclimation is so important, right? Also, it's a good thing when you buy coral from anybody, find out from them where they place that particular frag or that coral. What is the position in their aquarium? See what lights they are using in their aquarium. That's very important. That will give you an idea between what you have at home and what they have at home. If their lights are too strong and your lights are not strong, and if you think they're keeping in the 6 inches, you're going to try and go up there, or vice versa, it will affect your coral, right? So that's a good thing to find out when you're buying corals. See where they are being placed in the seller's aquaria, right? Not just, any SPS, they have a basic, the number that I gave you is basic, but in the end, that coral that you buy has already been acclimated to a certain level of temperature, to a certain level of light. So you have to try and find that information. Do that research with the seller. Once you grab that information and once you follow that information in your tank, that will be a successful route to take for that particular coral to survive in your tank. And that will eventually determine the final placement, right? In terms of flow, they need strong flow. Now, when you have been, I don't know, how many of you guys have snorkeled here? Raise your hands. There you go, quite a few. When you are snorkeling right at the surface of the water, how's your body moving with that current? It moves you, right? Imagine if that current moves your body, that strong current that SPS coral is able to take. That's how strong flow those corals need. So if you just have a 1 or 2 corallias or here and there running, it would not help. They need strong flow, right? But if you have a mixed reef, you have to try and find the balance. Not so much where the sand starts having a sandstorm in your aquarium and your LPSs are, closing up, or your torches are closing up. So placement and finding that balance is the key. My coral right now, I have a mixed reef and I run my 2 MP40s at 80%, right, on both ends of each other, which are 4 feet apart of each other. So that's something that you got to keep in mind as well, finding that balance on the flow as well. Chemistry. I mean, this again is such an important aspect of today's presentation. I cannot emphasize, and this is where you will finally find out where and how I was able to nail it down. I cannot emphasize how important it is to test your aquarium water. It is very important. If you fall behind on testing your aquarium waters, then I can guarantee you won't be able to keep SPS. The numbers determine the success rate of your corals, right? Make sure you check the 6 parameters: your calcium, alkalinity, magnesium, salinity, phosphates, and nitrates. And make sure you do that regularly. Out of the 6, I understand it's not always possible, but I tell you what, this and this too, along with the salinity, the 4 are very important. Calcium and magnesium you can get away by testing once a month. You really don't even have to. But nitrates and phosphates, salinity and alkalinity is very important. Why I say alkalinity? It's because it's the deterrent. It will determine your coral's success and failure rate. Why I say salinity? Because salinity is how it determines the balance of calcium, alkalinity, and magnesium. If your salinity is going up and down, and if you think your calcium, alk, and magnesium are at the range what they require, for example, alkalinity is between 8 to 12, calcium is between 350 to 450, and your magnesium is 1350 to 1450. You might say, oh, I have the perfect numbers, I'm fine, but your salinity is at 1.021. Well, guess what? That number that you just got from your calcium, they are not being utilized the same way how it's supposed to be, because your salinity determines that numbers in the end. So your salinity is very important, and you have to make sure that your salinity is always at 1.026 parts, the specific gravity, or 35 parts per trillion. So, and nitrates and phosphates. Again, if you let these two, I always call them the two buddies. If you let these 2 buddies go out of hands, they will affect your aquarium. They will definitely have algae will outbreak, and algae will eventually take over your tank, and you will have something not to look forward to. Rather than a beautiful thriving SPS, you will see hair algae growing, you will see bryopsis, you will see all sorts of ugly stuff that you do not want to see. So that's why you got to keep these 2 guys in check as well, right? Calcium and magnesium you can get away. Richard Ross most recently on one of his live streams at Neptune said he does not even test calcium anymore. He does not. He's like, I don't even need to touch that. I don't even need to touch the magnesium. I just test this parameter and this parameter. And he has a successful thriving SPS. And for those of you who's Richard Ross, he is one of the guru up in the US, and he is very much acclaimed and respected in the saltwater industry. And he runs, if I'm not mistaken, which is that big aquarium. He actually runs the backside of that now, the whole science of it, right? So coming from him means a lot for guys like us, because he is somebody who is actually a biologist, a marine biologist, and he has done so much testing. right? And so these are the 6 parameters that you got to keep an eye and try and keep them in balance. Once you kind of tie this elephant with its thorn, you should be able to have no issues in growing any SPS. I don't care if it's Acropora, it's Digitata, Montipora, you name it, you will be able to grow any SPS once you have this thing in, in its check, right? And keep them stable. You got to keep those parameters stable. Not that one week you have your alkalinity at 8 and the next week your alkalinity went straight up to 11. Well, there is a problem happening there. And why? You got to then find out why that problem is happening. Maybe you're dosing too much. Maybe you don't really need to dose. Your tank is new still. You really don't need to worry about dosing alkalinity right now. Watch that trend of your aquarium, right? That's how, if you see, I have those logs. You got to make sure that you keep some sort of log of your parameters, right? And I use Apex, which pretty much gives, does all my parameter logging as well. And it gives me an idea over the time from when I started that tank up until this past weekend. Where's my alkalinity? How's my calcium doing? How's my magnesium doing? It kind of gives you a trend, right? When you add corals, and when they start growing, your parameter is going to drop because they are consuming that chemical from your water, and you got to you got to up your dosing to bring that parameter stable, right? So that's something. That's why testing the parameters, keeping them stable, and bringing them to the log will help you as well. So these are the basic practices that we follow to try and monitor that tank, right? Let me ask you this. How many of you guys have calibrated your refractometer, and when did you guys do that? Once a month.
Every week.
Good answer.
Every time you test.
Every time you test. How often you test?
Once a week.
Once a week. Very good. Once a week. Once a week. That's a good answer. Once a week. Why? Because as I said, your salinity determines the calcium, alkalinity, and magnesium. If your salinity is not stable, this won't be stable. Even though you see on your test results that your calcium is 450, it's really not 450 that's been consumed in your aquarium. It's something else. So your salinity determines these values. And that's why you need to make sure that you calibrate your refractometer every time you do the test. It just takes what? 10 seconds to calibrate. You buy that solution, drop, and test it, make sure it's 1.026, and then you are good to go. Why I say that is because if you want to grow SPS, you have to provide some hard work towards your tank. And if it takes 3 seconds for me to calibrate my refractometer and that will keep my parameter stable, I think that's a fair bargain. Because if you kind of fall lazy on this, you're going to fall lazy on this. It's like a chain effect. And eventually what's going to happen? Your tank's going to suffer. You don't want that. You spend that kind of money and you want that coral to survive. You need to do your part on your side as well, right? So that's something very important, right? I already spoke about logging your parameters because that will give you the trend going on in your tank. When, at what time of the month my alkalinity shot up, and what did it go down? What coral did I add when it went down? You might need to, say for example, your alkalinity is at constantly 7.5, and 8. You added a nice big brain coral or trachyphilia. Well, that trachyphilia is a big coral body and it's going to suck some alkalinity, calcium, and magnesium from your tank. Next weekend you're going to test, it's going to go down. Your alkalinity is going to go down. So you got to test. You got to test and log those parameters, and you got to find out why did my parameters went low or why did it go high. That relationship is in your tank, and you need to, as a hobbyist, be attentive towards your tank to find out why it happened. It's just not that simple about dosing high and dosing low. Find out what you have done over that week as well, where you see that difference in your logging measurements, right? And here comes the trick of mine. So 4.5 years of 150 gallon, and I was having my parameters locked in, no issue whatsoever. But I wasn't able to grow SPS, except the 2 buddies. And out of the 2 buddies, the second guy was always the trouble for me. As we say, the second son or the second daughter is always the troublemaker. For me, this guy was the troublemaker, the nitrates. How I found out, one fine day, I was just doing my research on Reef Central. And I'm like, a thread pops up saying, nitrates, and what's your nitrates? And I'm like, what's nitrates? I tested my nitrates only when I cycled my tank. Believe it or not, 4 years I never tested nitrates. And I'm like, I thought nitrates only needs to be tested when you cycle your tank, because once your nitrates once you see nitrates on your test kit, you know your tank is cycled. So I left that animal away. I'm like, okay, I'm good. My nitrates I can see my nitrates, so it's good. Only to realize after 4.5 years that nitrates were determining my success and failure of keeping SPS, because they do not like too high nitrates. And I'm like, wait a minute, what's going on here? The very same day I went and picked up a Celifert test kit and I tested my nitrates, and you won't believe what I saw. Let me tell you the color. Dark, dark, dark pink. Thank you. That was 100 parts per million. 100 parts per million was my nitrates. And I'm like, hello. Well, there's no way I'm going to be able to keep nitrates at that. Nitrates needs to be under 5. Now, you could keep SPS at 30 parts per million nitrates, as 50 parts, nitrates, but you need to gradually reach that stage. You cannot just have a new tank with 30 parts per million nitrate and expect that SPS to survive. No. I know, Avro, you have 30 parts per million nitrates in your tank.
At one point.
Right, at one point. And his SPSs are mind-blowing, like his tank is beautiful. But it took him so many years to gradually bring it to that stage. It just didn't happen overnight. So that's one thing you got to remember. And when I found out, I'm like, okay, well, what's my next stage? How do I bring my nitrates down? Water change, people say, right? So I did an 80% water change on 150 gallon, only to find out next day my nitrates are back at 100. So water change does not remove your nitrates unless you do regular, a whole system reset. It will not bring your nitrates down. Let me tell you very honest. What you really need to do to bring your nitrates down is carbon dosing. I ended up going with no POX, which is a Red Sea product, and I followed that regime the way how they suggested. I went through with that regime. You got to make sure your skimmer is skimmed in a wet format, because you need to see that color of the skimmed. And eventually, when your skimmer starts working and starts taking out the organics, it will show you the skimmed color is like a teal green tea color. That's when you know your nitrates are dropping. And for sure enough, my nitrates started dropping after 3 weeks of the no-pox regimen. And when that started happening, I had a green stag which was almost on its way out. I started seeing green color on it. And that was the first sign. And that kind of, gave me some confidence to myself. I'm like, whoa, this is a turning point for me. At one point, I was not even able to keep Montiporas and bird's nest. And here I am, a hardy coral, which is Acropora, is thriving in my tank, and not only thriving, coloring. So for the first month, I watched the trend and it survived. It didn't die. And then gradually the color started coming up. It was a bally green slimer, which had turned completely pale, and it started coloring up really deep green. And I'm like, wow. And then I tested my nitrates regularly. I was finding my nitrates were dropping, like literally dropping every weekend. And I was seeing my corals flourishing. So that was my issue right there, right? So as I said, the parameters, you could have the perfect parameters, but make sure that they are all interrelated. Everything needs to be in check within the range. One fine example I'll give you. If your magnesium is at, say, for example, 900, if your calcium is at, say, for example, 450 or 400, which is in the perfect range, what would you think? You would think my calcium is in the range, so my corals are okay. I just need to increase my magnesium. No. Your calcium, whatever is been consumed in your water, is basically times 3, divided by 3 of your magnesium. So if your magnesium is 900, divide that by 3, your tank's calcium is only 300. Even though on the test it's showing 400 or 450, and you think you are on, you are within the range, it's not, because your magnesium determines how much your calcium is being consumed. So these are all interrelated chemists. They need to be in that range, and they all needs to be in that range for you to be able to keep those thriving SPS corals. And it's not that hard. Again, don't get overwhelmed with these parameters. It's not that hard. Magnesium you can just top off once a month. Sometimes your water change can just take care of your magnesium requirements. You don't even have to, but do test. Once a month, just keep, test your magnesium. Once a month, test your calcium, just to keep an eye on it. But the another 4, I would say this you can go every 2 weeks, but your salinity and your alkalinity should be every week, regardless of your time schedule or whatever, because those things do fluctuate and you need to keep those things balanced all the time, right? So remember, your magnesium determines your calcium intake as well. If your magnesium is 900, your calcium is 400, it's not been consumed 400, it's only been consumed 300, right? Your salinity determines your calcium, your alkalinity, and your magnesium. The ratio of phosphates and nitrates determine how much there needs to be balanced. Not too low of one, not too high of the other. There is, as I said, red fill ratio. When you do some research on the Google, you will find out what that red fill ratio is, and that ratio is the one that happens in the wild, where your nitrates and your phosphates are actually balancing themselves out. They are the one balancing each other, right? So follow that regimen and you should be fine, right? Now, if you do not have time to go read about red fill ratio, do not worry about it. Just follow the range, the parameters that you want to keep it at. When you're starting your tank, keep your nitrates under 2. Keep your nitrates under 2, and then gradually see. If you think that, you know, that's a safe number to keep, to be very honest. If you gradually think you want to increase your nitrates, go slowly. See how your corals are responding. If your corals are coloring still, keeping their colors, you could start increasing those nitrates and phosphates. But if your corals are turning, you know, brown, that means your phosphates have gone too high, or your alkalinity is probably dropping or going too high. So on one of my slides, I will actually share with you guys what are some of the visuals of how to find out what could be the problem. That's based on my experience. So here's the slide that I created, right? These are the visuals. You know, many times how do we know if our corals are not doing? We usually watch them, we see them, right? We don't test them all the time. So these are some of the visuals issues. What are some of the signs related to that issue? So I'll just pick on one. SPS bleaching. Okay, so what could be the sign is they are turning white, they start turning white from the tip, right? They are bleaching. Okay, what could be the possible causes? Alkalinity swing. When your alkalinity at 7 one point and the next week it went to 9, well, there's a swing of 2 points in that swing, and that could be the reason why because corals do not like elk swings. They do not. That's the one parameter you got to constantly keep balanced. So if it's elk swing, and then again, what should you be doing? So as I said, the solutions to put that issue down. Test your elk regularly, right? Increase or decrease. If it's below 7, try to increase it gradually. If it's too high, try to decrease it gradually. You should not be decreasing or increasing instantly, gradually. Go with the small little flow, right? The another thing, strong light, possible cause of bleaching SPS. Acclimate your corals to your lights from placing lower on the sandbed. As I said, acclimating those corals is very important. Gradually bring that up, right? So if you go through this thread, SPS browning. Why are my SPS browning? So if you could see, again, elk swing, strong light, and pest. Sometimes when your SPSs are not happy, the first sign of them not being happy is they're going to start turning brown. They will start losing their colors, and then they will be on their way out, right? So once you figure that out, like, okay, these are the issues I'm having, my SPS is brown. What could be my issue? Well, this, based on my experience, I gave you guys this, issue, causes, and these are the solutions. Again, test your elk, find out what's your phosphate, because when your corals are turning brown, there's too much of nutrient in your tank, too many phosphates in your tank. So check your phosphates and bring them down to 0.03. Again, slowly, right? How do you bring your phosphate down? Reduce your feeding. We always want to feed more and more and more and more. Oh, look at my clownfish, it's eating. Bring it more, bring it more, bring it more. Well, guess what? That food is getting decayed somewhere, and that's going to affect your corals. So finding that balance is the key, right? Yes, George?
Do you find a difference between dry food and frozen food for phosphate?
Very good question. Very good question. I have found that the frozen food adds a little bit more of phosphates than the flake food. Why? Because you don't understand the quantity of food that you are feeding from your frozen cubes. You don't know how much stuff is in there. Now you could get away by, try to, thaw that food and then rinse it with RODI water to try and get all that oil out. That will help you. You could do that. Or that one cube, instead of feeding that whole cube, feed half a cube. Right? That could be your answer to controlling that as well. Right? For flakes, you could just take a little bit of flakes and do it, right? But again, it depends on how much you feed your tank. You could feed frozen food and still control your phosphates and nitrates. Depends on how big is your tank, and how much are you feeding. If you feed more, it does not make a difference between a frozen food and a dry food, because in the end you are feeding more. If you are putting in more and your filtration system is not strong enough to take it out, you're going to end up having a problem, right? So then again, reduce feeding and raise the coral position. Sometimes less light and SPS is not happy. If you have an SPS that require 400, 450 par and you have kept it under 100 and 150 par, well, it's going to show you that sign. It's going to lose the color. It's brown. Maybe that coral is not getting the strong light that it needs to grow and it needs to color up, right? So follow this before making any changes, right? And it's always good to talk to people, before you go. I have tried to give this slide as a visual to the newcomers so that at least they know which way or what could be the issues and what are the solutions. And what do you see in this slide? The main reason for most of these issues are your alkalinity. And as I said, that's one parameter that you need to make sure to keep in check of. Alkalinity, it's a very, very important parameter, and once you kind of tie that guy with his horn, you should have no issues. And you will learn when you are doing all this that, you know what, my corals are doing well, I'm going to test my water. You kind of feel that relationship with your tank, and then you won't be lazy enough to not test those parameters, right? Once you develop that relation, it's like forming a habit, right? Oh, you know what, every morning I wake up and I brush my teeth. Every weekend I got to check my parameters. Once you develop that relationship with your tank, you should not have any issues, right? So these are some of the visuals that if you want this slide, connect me after the talk, and I can always email you guys. I can post on the Facebook. I already posted this on Reef Canada as well as GTAR, but if you still need it, I have a copy. I can always email it to you guys, not a problem. Coral nutrition. Do you really need to feed the corals? It's a very debatable topic. Some hobbyists have success feeding them. Some hobbyists say it's not required. Your fish waste is actually the coral nutrition for those corals. But most of the times, the proven BRS, bulk reef supply, actually did an investigative study, and they came up saying that reef roids and reef chilies are the two ones that has made some difference in the coral health, particularly LPS and softy corals. In terms of SPS, I do feed my corals twice a week, but because I have a mixed reef system, I have an LPS system as well, so I need to feed those guys to keep them happy. So, because of the flow, these guys SPS might be picking up on some, but I do not feed my SPS corals. I just feed my LPS and let it do what it needs. So it's really not necessary. You just feed your fish, and their fish waste becomes the coral nutrition, right? Too much nutrition equals brown SPS. Again, that's the visuals right there, right? So control feeding. Control feeding is very important. What goes in has to come out. Import and export. If you are putting too much in your tank and it's not being exported by way of your filtration, you're going to have problem. You're going to have brown SPS. So your filtration system needs to be very strong. And in the end, it comes down to you as a hobbyist, right? Us as a hobbyist. What's your husbandry and maintenance, right? Introspect yourself. How good are you in terms of taking care of that tank, right? Buy it from a good source. I cannot specify how important this is. This is basically if you are buying it from somebody who has all the brown SPSs and you say, oh, $20, here's my SPS. Well, you should see his tank first. Why is all his coral brown? You got to find out that first. Don't just go and buy a cheap coral from somebody and, oh, I've got an SPS coral and it's going to color up. No. That, if you are not buying it from the good source, you are basically preparing yourself on the path of failure, right? So it's up to you whom to buy and where to buy. Make that study, right? Find out among your local reefers. Join the local reef community and, get in touch with and see. You will find most of the good source are the hobbyists. It's the LFS are basically good for selling dry goods, and they do bring some really nice, healthy looking, wild, good, beautiful corals. But coral aquaculture, and here is where it comes to the play. If I'm buying coral from Avro or Devon or from you, sir, or from you, George, or from you, I know those corals, you guys have taken care of that coral. It has grown in your tank. But if I'm buying it from, argument's sake, I throw it out, any LFS out there, they just imported that coral a week ago and it's sitting in their tank. Is it going to survive in my tank? I don't know. But I know the coral frag that I bought from a fellow hobbyist, they have the colony in their tank. So that coral is already used to the home aquarium parameters, the home aquarium dosing elements. That coral is already used to. So buy it from a good source and buy it from a local hobbyist if possible. Go see their tank, right? Go, ask them questions. And I can tell you, every hobbyist loves to talk about their tanks. Correct me if I'm wrong, right? And you can ask them hundreds of questions and they will give you some valuable answers. Make sure you buy it from a good source. That's the one important thing I would suggest you, right? Every coral you buy, make sure you dip them, right? It does not guarantee the pest removal, but it's the one line of defense that you take when you are buying that coral, right? Make sure you dip it. There are various kinds of dips, right? There, you could use, off-the-shelf products, Revive, and, people also use Bayer and whatnot, right? And it works, Bayer from Home Depot, right? It works, but you should be able to know what are the ingredients, right? I use Revive because, you know what? The study has been done. It works. It has worked for me since I started, my SPS. So I use Revive. So make sure you dip that frag or that colony that you buy, right? Visually inspect them. When you're buying that coral, if it's brown color, check underneath. Most of the times, check the frag plug and the underneath of the frag plug. You will find some pests sitting there as well, right? When you get that coral, right? Any coral that you buy, chuck that frag plug away. Try not to use, even if it's encrusted, I don't care, because most of the time the frag plugs, the pests are actually under that frag plug and you won't see it, because when you are looking at a coral, you are looking at it from the top. How often have you seen a frag plug from the underneath? Raise me any hands, anybody who has done it. One? Exactly, right? That's very important. We don't see. That's where the pest hide, right? So that's one thing very important. And when you bring that in, chuck that frag plug out, make sure you dip it. And then you add up to your tank. That's kind of line of defense. You are setting yourself to successful growing SPS, right? These are best practices that has worked for years in the hobby, that has worked for myself, that has worked for so many hobbyists. Follow that basic practices. You should be able to take care of it. Do not be lazy on doing this, because you're going to end up with pest in your tank and it will just ruin all the other corals, right? So this is very important. Maintenance, right? Clean your equipment once every month or once every 2 or 3 months. It depends on your schedule. But do clean your equipment. Take those return pumps out, dip them. I usually do. I take every 3 months. I take my MP40s out and I just dip them overnight into 50-50 of vinegar and RODI water, and I let them run overnight. Vinegar is basically acid and it's bioorganic. It's organic. So it's good enough for your tank. That takes care of all the crude, all the thick purple algae that's grown on that particular power heads or equipment. It cleans it up. Same thing with your return pumps. I try not to open it completely, because in the end you might damage the propeller shaft or whatever. Just take them out and run them overnight on a slow flow. That's why DC pump is good. But if not, just control with the valve and run them overnight in a 5-gallon bucket in 50-50 of vinegar and RODI. That will clean everything inside and out, right? Removal of pests such as Aiptasia. I use the Aiptasia X. Once a here and there you have Aiptasia, you just do that. And some people have used the sludge from Cockwasser. That has worked as well. So removal of pests. I know one person who had one Aiptasia in his tank and he was like, don't worry about it. It's just one. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Only to find out after a month his tank was full of Aiptasia, taken over completely. Come to a point where he says, Ash, what do I do? I'm like, you should have taken this problem into consideration when you saw it. Don't wait till the problem takes over your tank. Fix the problem when you see it. Fix those parameters when you see those parameters are going out of the line. Fix it right there. Don't wait till they fix your tank eventually in a negative manner, right? Quick overview of your test results, just every weekend or once a month. Make sure that you view the tendency of your, the logs. When is it going down? When is it coming down? When is it going up? When is it going down? What did I do in this month? What did I do in this week? Why is it going down or going up? Ask yourself that questions, right? And then Building redundancy, such as 2 heaters or extra pumps, right? So many times heaters are known to fail, right? That's one equipment that has actually crashed so many tanks, right? You might not even realize you put one heater and you think that heater is going to take care of your problem. It works fine. One fine day it stops working. You wouldn't know if you don't have a controller like me, and an alert comes to me. If you don't have that, if you do not have a second heater that acts as a backup, if that heater fails, the second heater will click in. So that's the redundancy you are building into your tank. Make sure you build that redundancy in your tank as well, right? Just safeguarding yourself so that your corals can survive, right? And these are basic practices that you can apply for soft corals as well as LPS corals, right? SPSs are more demanding, but when you follow the basic practices, you should be able to take care of that, right? Right here is a picture of a brown SPS that I saw once in my tank, and it has colored up so very well nicely. Now this used to be in my 151st, like completely brown, and I wasn't just sure what's going on until I nailed down the nitrates being the issue. The conclusion, again, know the history of a successful tank. When you see a particular hobbyist tank, if that hobbyist have SPS growing and flourishing well, try to connect with that hobbyist. Try to ask that person question. Try to gain that knowledge, right? Follow one hobbyist tank and do everything. Don't try to follow, George's tank is beautiful. George is keeping alkalinity at 9. Perfect. I'm going to do that. But then Amro is keeping his salinity at so-and-so. So now I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that. What am I doing here? I'm changing parameters one after the other. No. Pick one hobbyist and follow that. That's the best practice as well. Follow one hobbyist, what he's doing. If he's successful, he or she is successful enough, and follow that tank. And that's how you will be able to follow, have a successful path as well, right? Keep your parameters stable, as I said, stable with bold. Make sure it's stable. Try to avoid those parameter swings. Try to avoid those parameter swings. Hands out, that's the one thing that I am guilty of as well. I'm the first one. I will have every day, my wife knows, every day I come from work and I see, oh, this coral has fallen down, put my hand in. This rock has fallen down, put my hand in. My this, my that. And in the end, when I'm sleeping, I'm like, I preach this and I'm doing the same mistake. So I'm the first one guilty of that. But again, I want you guys to take from my experience, right? I want you guys to learn that this is what you should not be doing it. If you really want to put your hands in, buy some long gloves from Uline. Those are cheap and they are safe enough. Make sure that they are, not that powder wash or whatever. They are safe enough to put it into that, and you should be able to put that hands in your water. But try to avoid that. What I use now is a dollar store, the litter picker, which is deep enough for me to pick up any frag. Safe and simple. Why we have to put our hands out? Because your hands, you might not know, you might have even washed it with Dove or whatever, but there are oils still on your hand that you don't see, which you are putting into your aquarium, and that's killing your water slowly and steadily. That's killing the bacteria that runs your tank. Your bacteria is so important. That's the main thing of your ecosystem, right? In the end, it's an ecosystem, right? So your bacteria is healthy, your coral and your tank will survive. If your bacteria is dying, your coral will die. Your tank will go down as well. So make sure that you keep your hands out. Leave your tank alone and watch the coral grow. Sometimes we change. We make so many changes. My lights are not too strong. Maybe put it more down, put it more high, or it's too strong. Try to avoid those changes. Try to avoid those quick changes. Don't make those changes. Leave it alone. Trust me. An SPS coral can grow in some stable water. As far as they are stable, they are fine. But if you make changes up and down, they don't like those changes, right? How would you feel if I make you sleep on a nice king size bed on a nice healthy mattress, and the next night I say, you got to sleep on the floor, or your wife kicks you out and say, go on the couch. For first couple of nights you will be fine, but the next night you will say, I don't want to sleep on the floor. My back hurts, this hurts. Same principle. And why I try to bring this thing up is because in the end, these are animals. They do not like changes. Keep it stable. Keep it stable, right? Keep it stable. And everything else will just survive once you kind of lock down everything, all the follow this routine. And here is the synopsis of, that's the name of my YouTube channel. Ashfaque, if you just type it in, and you will be able to find Ash's Reef channel. You could also follow me on Instagram as Ash's Aquaria. as well as on the Facebook as Ashfaque Khan with my first and last name. And yes, I guess that's pretty much it. Any questions? Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.